John had always known the Valrian were formidable, but as he stood in front of their imposing stronghold, he felt the weight of what he was about to face. This was no ordinary fortress. The sleek, towering structure shimmered under the eerie red sky, a symbol of the aliens' technological superiority. It was a place of death, of AI-driven sentinels and robotic warriors, machines built to erase any trace of humanity from the galaxy. His mission was simple: infiltrate, activate the Excalibur Protocol, and stop the alien eye from destroying Earth once and for all. But simple wasn't a word that fit the reality of this task. John glanced at the surrounding terrain, scanning for any sign of movement. His cloaking device was working, but he knew it wouldn't last long. The Valrian's advanced tech could detect even the smallest anomaly, and John was on borrowed time. A faint hum of static echoed in his ear as he activated the cloaking system, his body vanishing into the shadows. Every step he took was a calculated risk, but he had no choice. Failure wasn't an option. Earth's future depended on this moment. The silence around him was deafening. As he approached the heavily guarded entry, his heart pounded in his chest. The high-tech defenses of the Valrian stronghold were impressive, yet humanity had always found a way through impossible odds. John's breath quickened. He knew the hardest part of the mission wasn't infiltrating the fortress. It was surviving long enough to complete it. He moved swiftly, weaving between the patrols of alien soldiers who stood frozen in place like statues, waiting for the slightest sign of danger. Each soldier wore black, chrome armor, their glowing blue eyes scanning the horizon. They were programmed to follow orders without hesitation, and they would kill anything that wasn't one of their own. John's fingers tightened around his rifle, his pulse steady but his mind alert. He had to make it past them, without drawing attention, without failing. Reaching the entrance to the central chamber, John crouched low, careful not to make a sound. The door before him slid open with a faint hiss, revealing the dark interior of the stronghold. A soft click from his wristband signaled the activation of his secondary cloaking device. It would only last for a few moments, but it was enough. John slipped inside, his movements silent, like a shadow stalking its prey. Inside, the fortress was even more intimidating. Towering pillars of metallic alloy stretched up to the ceiling, where a network of glowing blue lights flickered, casting strange, shifting shadows across the walls. The air was cold, artificial, and smelled faintly of burned ozone. The Excalibur Protocol was somewhere deep within the structure, hidden in the heart of the enemy's power grid. But getting there wouldn't be easy. Every corner was a potential death trap. John crept through the halls, every step deliberate, his mind focused. He reached a junction where a small patrol of Valrian soldiers stood, their backs to him. They were talking in low, robotic tones. For a moment, John considered waiting them out, but then one of the soldiers turned around, his head snapping toward John's direction. Time slowed as John's instincts kicked in. There was no way out. He couldn't retreat. He had to act. In an instant, John dropped his cloaking device and launched himself at the nearest soldier. His rifle swung in a smooth arc, hitting the soldier's neck with a sickening crunch. The creature crumpled to the ground, its blue eyes fading as it powered down. But the other two were already turning toward him, their weapons raised. John didn't hesitate. He dove into the nearest cover, narrowly dodging a volley of laser fire. The heat from the blasts singed the air around him. His heart raced as he fired back, the rifle's recoil pushing him back into the shadows. One soldier went down with a shot to the chest, sparks flying from its damaged circuits. The second soldier rushed forward, its bladed arms gleaming in the dim light. John's pulse hammered in his ears. He had seconds to act. He holstered his rifle and drew a combat knife from his belt, its handle cold against his palm. With a quick motion, he lunged, ducking under the alien's swing and delivering a quick slash to its throat. The creature let out a robotic screech before crumpling to the floor. John's chest heaved with exertion, but he didn't have time to rest. The noise from the fight would surely attract more guards. His mind raced as he made his way deeper into the fortress, each step taking him closer to the heart of the mission. The Excalibur Protocol. It was close now, but with every step, the risk of being discovered grew exponentially. The further he moved, the more hostile the environment became. The walls narrowed, and the corridors grew more labyrinthine. The air felt heavier, thick with the buzzing hum of the Valrians' defense systems. Every turn brought a new challenge, a new threat. John's sharp eyes scanned each corner, anticipating the next attack before it happened. A sudden, soft click behind him had him spinning, just in time to deflect a laser blast with his combat knife. The flash of light was blinding, but he was ready. 2 more Valrian soldiers, this time with heavy artillery, emerged from the shadows, their weapons trained on him. John dove to the ground, rolling to his feet and taking cover behind a steel column. The soldiers fired relentlessly, but John's mind was clear. He knew how to outsmart them. He waited for the right moment, then rushed forward, using his cloaking device to momentarily vanish from their sight. The soldiers fired into the empty space where he had been, but by the time they realized their mistake, John was already behind them. With a swift, powerful strike, John incapacitated the first soldier, disabling its weapon and kicking it to the ground. The second soldier reacted too late. John grabbed the alien by the shoulders, slamming it into the wall with enough force to crush its internal systems. It collapsed, motionless. John stood over the fallen soldiers, catching his breath. The battle had been close, but it wasn't over. He could see the glowing door at the end of the hallway, the entry to the Excalibur Protocol's core system. The final leg of his journey was here, but as he stepped forward, a cold chill ran down his spine. He knew the hardest part was yet to come. Inside that room, the fate of humanity rested. He just had to make it there alive. John had made it through the outer defenses of the Valrian fortress, but he knew the real challenge lay ahead. The central core, where the Excalibur Protocol was hidden, was heavily guarded, and every step deeper into the heart of the fortress felt like walking into the lion's den. But he couldn't afford to hesitate. His mission was clear, and the survival of humanity rested on his shoulders. There was no room for failure. He moved cautiously through the cold, metallic hallways, his boots echoing softly in the silence. The faint hum of the fortress's power systems vibrated in the air, but there was something else, too, an unsettling feeling, as if something wasn't right. John couldn't quite place it, but it gnawed at the back of his mind. It wasn't the first time he'd had that feeling, especially when things seemed to be going too smoothly. The closer he got to the central core, the more tense the atmosphere became. Finally, he reached the door to the Excalibur Protocol chamber. His heart hammered in his chest. This was it. The weapon that could turn the tide of the war was right behind that door, and with it, humanity's last hope. But as his hand hovered over the control panel, preparing to unlock it, something strange happened. The doors slid open on their own, and inside, waiting for him, was someone he never expected to see. Lyra, the alien defector, stood in the middle of the room, her eyes cold, her expression unreadable. John froze. He had trusted her, relied on her to help him deactivate the Excalibur Protocol. But now, standing in front of him, she didn't look like the ally he had fought alongside. She looked different, distant, almost as if she were a stranger. "What are you doing here?" John asked, his voice hardening. "This is it, Lyra. The Excalibur Protocol. You promised to help me stop it." Lyra's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a smile of reassurance. It was something darker. "Did you really think I was here to help you, John?" she said softly, almost mocking him. "Did you really think I was on your side?" John's pulse quickened. He took a cautious step forward, his mind racing. "You're a defector," he said, trying to make sense of it. "You left your people. You told me you wanted to help humanity." "I did," she said, her voice suddenly colder, more calculating. "But not in the way you think." She took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. I didn't leave the Valerian because of some moral compass, John. I left because they weren't as powerful as they seemed, and I wanted a piece of that power for myself. John's stomach twisted. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Everything he had believed about Lara, everything he had trusted, was a lie. She had used him, manipulated him, and now she was playing a dangerous game of her own. He had walked right into her trap. "So what now?" John asked, his voice barely a whisper, but filled with cold fury. "You're working with the Valerian. This was all a setup. You led me here to die, didn't you?" Lyra didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stepped to the side, revealing a control panel behind her. "It wasn't personal, John," she said, almost regretfully. "The Valerian promised me a position of power, a place at the top. I couldn't pass it up. You were just a means to an end." John's hands clenched into fists, the weight of her betrayal settling in. The betrayal stung deeper than anything he had ever felt. He had fought alongside her, bled alongside her, and now he realized she had been playing him all along. But there was no time for rage. The Excalibur protocol was still active, and he needed to stop it before it was too late. "You're making a mistake," John said, his voice steady now, even though his heart was pounding in his chest. "You think the Valerian will keep their word. They'll use you, Lara. They'll betray you, just like you're betraying me. And when they're done with you, you'll be nothing but a tool to them." Lyra's eyes flashed with anger, but she didn't move. "I don't need your advice, John. The Valerian have the power, and I'm going to be part of that power. You, on the other hand." She trailed off, glancing toward the control panel. "You're too late. The protocol is already activated. You've lost." John's mind raced. She was right. The Excalibur protocol was already running, its systems already in place, ready to unleash a deadly virus that would cripple humanity's defenses and allow the Valerian to wipe them out. There was no way to stop it now, unless he acted fast. With a flash of clarity, John reached for his weapon, his fingers brushing the cold metal of his energy rifle. In one swift motion, he aimed it at Lyra. "I'm not leaving without stopping it." Lyra's eyes widened in shock, but she quickly regained her composure. "You really think you can kill me and stop the protocol in time?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're a fool, John. You can't stop it. You can't stop me." "I can try," John shot back, his finger tightening on the trigger. He knew he had only one chance. One shot to end this before the virus took hold. But before he could pull the trigger, the room suddenly shifted. The walls trembled, and a loud mechanical whirring noise filled the air. Lara's face twisted into a grin. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" The lights in the room flickered, and John's heart sank. The Valerian had anticipated his every move. The betrayal wasn't just from Lyra. It was a part of something far bigger. The room was being sealed, locking him in with the very weapon he had hoped to destroy. The Excalibur protocol was no longer just a virus. It was an unstoppable force, and John had walked right into its grasp. He didn't know how, but he had to find a way out, even if it meant facing Lyra one last time. The atmosphere inside the Valerian stronghold had shifted in an instant. What had been a quiet, calculated mission to deactivate the Excalibur protocol had turned into a race against time. John stood there, facing the control panel, knowing that every second he spent talking to Lyra was a second closer to Earth's destruction. He was running out of options, but one thing was clear: he couldn't let this be the end. Lyra had turned her back on him completely. There was no trace of the ally he once knew. The woman who had once claimed to be a defector, the one who promised to help humanity, was nothing more than a puppet in the Valerian's game. The betrayal burned in John's chest, but he couldn't let it cloud his judgment. The Excalibur protocol was still ticking. Every moment wasted brought him closer to a catastrophe that would wipe out his home planet. He gripped his rifle tightly, his mind racing. The security in the room had already been triggered. The walls were slowly closing in, and the automated systems were preparing for the protocol to activate fully. There was no escaping the chamber now, and John had no way of deactivating the virus on his own. Lyra had sealed his fate. But then, the faintest glimmer of hope shone through the darkness. The control panel that Lyra had used to initiate the protocol was still active. Despite her betrayal, she hadn't fully locked him out. The panel screen flickered for a brief moment, and John knew it was a sign. There was a chance, a slim one, but he had to take it. "Lyra," John said, his voice low and filled with cold determination. "You may have sealed the room, but you haven't sealed your fate. You've made a mistake." She didn't even flinch. "What's done is done, John," Lyra said, her voice dripping with finality. "You can't stop what's coming. The Valrian are far beyond your capabilities, and I'm done playing the pawn. Now, I am the one in control." John's grip on his rifle tightened. His mind shifted gears as he formulated a plan, one born out of desperation and sheer will. There was still a chance to reverse the protocol, but it meant getting past Lyra, and it meant taking control of the system she had activated. He wasn't ready to give up just yet. "You can think you're in control, but you're wrong," John said, stepping forward slowly, his eyes narrowing with resolve. "The Valrian won't let you stay in power. They'll discard you the moment you're no longer useful. They're not loyal to you. You're just another tool to them." Lyra's eyes flashed with anger, but there was a flicker of doubt behind the ice in her gaze. For the first time, she hesitated. It was enough for John to move. In one swift motion, he hurled himself forward, launching himself at the control panel. Lyra lunged to stop him, but John was faster. He pushed the panel's glass cover aside, exposing the inner workings. Sparks flew as he yanked open the panel's emergency override. The lights flickered again, and the countdown clock on the screen blinked erratically. The Excalibur protocol wasn't fully initiated yet, but it would be soon. Too soon for John to reverse it. John glanced at Lyra, her expression twisted in fury. "You're too late, John. You'll never get through in time. The virus is already spreading." John didn't listen to her. He couldn't afford to. His mind was already working in overdrive, his fingers flying across the emergency overrides, trying to bypass the system's final safeguards. Each second was a lifetime, but he didn't have time to hesitate. The protocol's countdown was dropping fast. If he failed now, it would be the end of humanity. Lyra didn't wait to see if he succeeded. She drew a weapon from her side, a sleek black energy blade that hummed with a deadly power. "I've come too far to let you ruin everything, John," she snarled. "If you want to stop the protocol, you'll have to kill me." John's heart sank. He had never wanted to fight her, never wanted to take things this far. But now there was no choice. The Excalibur protocol needed to be stopped, and that meant stopping Lyra. He took a step back, positioning himself between her and the control panel. He would have to face her, even if it meant putting everything on the line. Lyra's blade glowed with deadly energy as she moved toward him. Her movements were precise, her speed almost too fast for John to track. He barely managed to duck as the blade sliced through the air, missing him by mere inches. He reacted instinctively, rolling to the side and firing a shot from his rifle. But Lyra was already on him, her blade flashing with deadly precision. John's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for the survival of everything he knew. The weight of that knowledge pushed him forward. He couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Not when Earth was on the brink of annihilation. The room was filled with the sounds of combat. Laser fire, the clash of metal against metal, the whir of machinery. John was exhausted, his body aching from the strain of battle. He was faster, but Lyra was stronger, more experienced with her blade. Every time he thought he had the upper hand, she countered with a fluid, deadly strike that left him no room to breathe. But John wasn't going to give up. With one final, desperate move, he lunged at her, his rifle raised high. Lyra swung her blade down, aiming for his head, but John twisted out of the way just in time. He fired his weapon, the blast striking her in the shoulder. She staggered back, her eyes wide with shock, but she didn't fall. "I won't let you destroy everything," John said, his voice firm. Lyra's gaze shifted from anger to disbelief. She had underestimated him. John took another step forward, raising his weapon again. But before he could pull the trigger, the lights in the room flickered one last time. The Excalibur protocol was almost fully initiated. John's mind raced as he made a split-second decision. He dropped his rifle and dove for the control panel, overriding the final command. The countdown halted, and for a moment, the room was silent. Lyra had lost, but the battle wasn't over. John's final stand had just begun. With the protocol halted, humanity had a chance, one final chance, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. The world outside the Valerian fortress was eerily still, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. But inside the control room, everything had changed. The battle was over. The Excalibur protocol had been stopped, just barely, and humanity had been given another chance to survive. John stood over the control panel, his heart pounding in his chest. His body ached from the battle, his hands trembling with the adrenaline of victory. But there was no time to rest. There was still so much left to do. Lyra lay on the ground, blood oozing from the wound in her shoulder. Her weapon was discarded, her face twisted with anger and disbelief. But John didn't spare her another glance. His mission had always been about humanity, not about her betrayal. The Valerian had tried to use them all, but they had underestimated the resilience of humanity. And now, they had paid the price. John's mind raced as he activated the final security protocols. The Excalibur protocol had been stopped, but the fortress was still a dangerous place. The Valerian were not known for mercy, and they wouldn't take their defeat lightly. There was no telling how much time he had before their reinforcements arrived. He had to get out. Fast. With a final glance at the control room, he turned and made his way toward the exit. His legs felt like lead, but he pushed through the pain. Every step brought him closer to the surface, closer to freedom. But the battle wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. The Valerian were ruthless, and they would stop at nothing to see humanity wiped out. But John couldn't let that happen, not when so many lives were on the line. The corridor was quiet now, but the silence was oppressive. The walls, once filled with the hum of machines, now felt hollow and empty. John's footsteps echoed in the stillness as he made his way through the fortress, the weight of the world pressing down on him. The Excalibur protocol had been the key to the Valerian's victory, and now that it was disabled, there was only one thing left to do: escape. But the question lingered in his mind. What would he do after he escaped? Would humanity really have a chance? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound, a voice. It was faint, barely audible, but it was there. John. He stopped dead in his tracks, his heart skipping a beat. He turned, his eyes scanning the darkened hallway. At first, he saw nothing. But then, emerging from the shadows, came a figure. It was Lyra, alive, though barely. She was standing, supported by one of the fortress's walls, her face pale and drawn, her hand clutching the wound in her shoulder. "You," she gasped, her voice ragged. "You didn't kill me." John's mind raced. She had been his enemy, his betrayer. But now, looking at her, wounded, vulnerable, he felt something shift inside him. "I could have killed you," he said, his voice steady. "But I didn't." Lyra looked up at him, her expression hard to read. "Why? After everything I did." "Because killing you won't bring humanity back," John said, his voice firm but not unkind. "It won't undo the damage, but stopping the Valerian, stopping the protocol, will. That's the only thing that matters now." For a moment, Lyra said nothing. Then, slowly, she nodded. "You're right," she said softly. "The Valerian, they won't stop. Not now. Not ever." John's heart sank. The fight was far from over. The Valrian were still out there, and they wouldn't rest until they finished what they had started. But that was a problem for another day. For now, they had won a small victory, and that was enough. He moved toward the exit once more, but this time, Lyra followed him. Her steps were slow, but she managed to keep up, her breathing labored but steady. Together, they moved toward the surface, where the light of day beckoned, distant but within reach. As they emerged from the fortress, the world outside felt different. It was still the same Earth, scarred by the Valrians' war machine, the skies still littered with the remnants of their ships. But it was also something else. There was hope now. The Excalibur Protocol had been stopped. Humanity had been given a chance to rebuild, to fight back. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, John felt a spark of optimism. They weren't alone anymore. They had allies, people who had fought alongside them, people who had survived the horrors of the Valrian invasion. The resistance, though fractured, was stronger than ever. John had seen firsthand what humans could accomplish when pushed to the brink. They would fight, and they would win. But there was more to do. The Valrian weren't just going to disappear. They would return. And when they did, humanity would have to be ready. John knew that, but he also knew one thing. He wasn't going to face them alone. Lyra, standing beside him now, was a reminder of that. Despite the betrayal, despite everything, she had helped them stop the protocol. She had played a part in humanity's survival. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a start. The two of them, together, had stopped a force that seemed unstoppable. "Are we ready for the next fight?" Lyra asked, her voice quiet but determined. John looked at her, then out across the horizon, where the sun was beginning to rise. It was a new day, one that had almost been lost. But they had found a way to save it. They had found a way to keep fighting. "We're ready," he said, his voice filled with resolve. "And we'll keep fighting, for as long as it takes." With that, they walked into the future, uncertain but determined, carrying with them the hope for humanity's survival.